Hi there, it's Peter King. I want to welcome you to our second podcast. Sadly, Vanessa won't be able to join us as she's away this week on holiday. So I'm going to pass you over to Sarah, who has been a massive help with all this. So take it away, Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Wingfield and welcome to the Creepy Café podcast with myself and Peter King today. Today we are deep diving into pregnancy related horrors. Now, we've had our own personal horror, haven't we, Peter, with technology? Because
Yeah,
this was
today,
supposed to
yeah.
be released around Mother's Day. But after
That
our
was weeks ago.
after our own horror adventure, we are now able to deep dive into different pregnancy movies. So, why don't we start with one of Peter's and we will take it in turns and go through different movies that left different feelings for us.
Well, saying that, I did see a movie the other day. It wasn't, well, it was about pregnancy and things like that. The Mummy. It was mainly all about children and them losing a child. And I thought was passed away for years, but years after the finally found her. What was interesting about it was mainly about sacrifice. The film, because anybody would sacrifice a member of their family, But I think, I don't know about pregnancy myself. I never went through it, but I know probably the hardest thing to go through, like physically and emotionally, mentally. So, what are your takes on it?
My first one is Rosemary's Baby. Now, this
Yeah.
is an absolute classic. And I don't see it as a devil baby story per se.
No.
To me, it's more about systematic control over a woman's body and autonomy. So Rosemary knows something's wrong from the beginning. Her instincts are
Quick,
clear, her discomfort's very real. But every single person around her is dismissing it.
yeah. Quick question. Did it scare you?
Um, I found it suspenseful.
Terrified me
But
when I first
it
saw it, but I was young, I suppose.
Yeah, it's more difficult to scare me because I was brought up on Asian tartan, extreme, really gory, really creepy Korean, Japanese, Asian horror. So you know, American horror and European tends to be more tame in
Yeah.
regards to that.
Compared.
But
Hmm.
her husband makes decisions for her. Her doctor overrides the concerns. This is something women, can relate to in the real world, real life horror. Her neighbours monitor and manipulate her, and she's slowly isolated from her own reality. So, what makes this film horrifying isn't the cult, it's how easily everyone collaborates to silence her. Her body becomes something shared, managed, used. And by the time she realizes the truth, she's already been turned into a vessel. That's the horror, not the baby, but the complete loss of autonomy.
Well, I don't talk about my first. I don't. There's not much. Well, there is a lot of pregnancy horrors out there, but the one that I watched last week was Mama. That was really. I haven't seen that a long time. But to me, that was. It was well, it was about obviously the passing of her. Well, the death of her his brother, and them taking over the children's lives. But they'd be like in a cabin, pretty much away from proper life for years. And long story short, if you haven't seen the film, like she finds out she's pregnant at the end, which kind of like at the start she goes, thank God I'm not pregnant, because she takes tons of pregnancy tests.
Yeah.
But she says, I don't know if I can handle this child, my own child and these two girls, because it's not my role as a mother. Yeah, I'm honestly sorry, I'm not that as informed as you are. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, with Mama, um, Shadow Entity, it isn't just the way she moves in the shadows, or how she watches from the corner of her room. I mean, it's almost sympathetic because she does try and protect the children, but the longer you sit with a presence, the less human it begins to
Mm.
feel. Because she doesn't just protect, she watches and she claims, she isolates. So her love isn't soft or guiding, it's consuming. So I
Yeah.
think people that have narcissistic mothers could probably relate to this horror, because she begins to feel less like a mother and more like something wearing the shape of one. There's a moment where grief stops being about the person you lost and starts becoming about possession, about not letting go, about refusing to accept that something isn't yours anymore. And Mama struggles to do that because she doesn't just love the children, she believes they belong to her. So the
So she's
emotional,
their mother now, yeah, I know.
yeah, the emotional attachment there is unnatural. It's more like an abusive relationship because they're her items, they're her property, not
But
individual children
not
with
her
their own
children, and no,
autonomy.
no.
So it mirrors something very real about attachment, especially when
Yeah.
it's formed in isolation or trauma. When your only source of comfort is also your source of fear, your brain doesn't
What was it?
separate the two, it fuses
What was it
them.
I thought when I watched it? I thought I saw her more of a monster type, and the mother, like the monster, whatever you want to call her, was their actual physical mother,
Yeah.
and they saw her like kind of like getting in the way of her. You know, like I didn't
Yeah, so
want
she
that
sees
in the
them
way.
as a threat as well, and she becomes
Yeah.
dangerous. She's pulling them away from the world and back into something enclosed and hidden. So, when you place that alongside Annabelle, played by Jessica Chastain, the contrast becomes even more striking. Annabelle
Yeah.
doesn't begin as a natural mother. She hesitates, she struggles, she doesn't instantly
Look,
connect in the way people
that's
expect
right.
women
That's
to.
left better.
But her version of love evolves and it learns and it allows space, because she recognizes that loving a child means eventually letting them exist beyond you, and that's something Mama, the entity, can't comprehend.
Yeah.
I wondered if she was a mother spirit or not, but in a way she could be. There are
Mm.
traces of that origin, fragments of something that was once human. But she's something more than that now, living in the shadows, being altered by time, by loss, the refusal to let go. And love has become tainted and twisted and
Yeah.
more about control than support. And I think that's why people in modern day will be able to relate to that with trauma bonds, because how trauma bonds work, especially in regards to domestic violence and domestic abuse,
Yeah.
is the perpetrator lures you in with all these wonderful things you haven't experienced before. You think you found a perfect partner, and then they change, the mask drops, they turn into a monster, the same as Mama really, and narcissistic parents, and then they harm. And then the harm's shocking, but then they're back to the nice. Also, they're not really like that, but this cycle repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats, and it creates this strong psychological bond, which is why victims are really interconnected with their abusers. And you see this in this movie, the children are absolutely enthralled with Mama. They're hiding her, they're protecting her, they're playing with her. They, become attached to this entity, not fully understanding at the start how feral she actually is.
But the kids think that this entity is their actual mother, but they don't know any different.
No, they don't. They don't.
But that one I saw the other day, and I had to watch more. Well, saying that, also what got me was like at the start of the movie, like they saw their uncle as their father because they're like exactly like. I think it's played by the same person actually, and like, that kind of got me. But because, as you say, go in real life experiences, and I know anybody would do anything to protect their child.
Hmm.
Even my mother's
Real
my age
parents
and
would,
stuff.
yes.
Yeah.
People that have real attachments and real bonds would go to the ends of the earth to protect their children.
I saw last week as well with Man. That was it was about what it wasn't
Can you
so much about
repeat the
pregnancy.
title of that again? Because I didn't quite
Sorry,
catch.
you called it Ma. You just called it Ma. That's what I
Yeah.
call it. Yeah, it's about this one. It's about this these college kids who basically their parents are away working, things like that, and there's this neighbor. Basically, she lost her child when she was a youngster, and she never had any kids after that. But she wanted to like act as their mother figure,
Yeah.
and she like joined them in. Someone said this is quite peculiar because it's well, no offense to her, it's a bit of an older lady, and ends up, in long story short, massacring the kids. It's a good movie, but I've never seen it.
One
But
that I relate to, and I actually bought the DVD of after watching, is Revenge because it is just chaotic, emotional, and deeply uncomfortable. So, a pregnant woman believes her unborn baby is telling her to kill. I see it as grief with nowhere to go. She's lost a partner, she's alone, she's pregnant, and no one's really holding her through it. So her mind creates something to cope, a voice, a reason, a direction. Even if that direction is violent, it feels more like abandonment. Like what happens when someone's left to process trauma alone while carrying life at the same time? It's not clean, it's not stable, but it's not supposed to be. Grief during pregnancy, it just isn't something we talk about enough. So
no, it,
that's the one I would highly recommend.
you know, I have respect for all women to go through this. I don't know what it's like to go through personally. I've been pregnant, but I think, well, I don't know if I don't really personal. If you went through the pregnancy phase yourself, so it
Yeah.
must be the toughest 9 months of your life.
Yeah, mine could probably make a horror movie too.
Oh no, I'd say that. That's say not to say that.
Yeah. So what's another one you would recommend to viewers, Peter?
Well, this isn't technically pregnancy. Well, is oh, The Exorcist, even though it is all about the child. I know it's more possession things, but
Hmm.
like at the end, she didn't want anything bad to happen to her daughter, which is understandable. And like, I'll give you a good example. I don't have any children, which hopefully I will one day. My cousin has a sweet child. Got him. He doesn't. I don't say he's like a horror villain, but he doesn't talk and things. But he's so. That's the word. Like super intelligent. It seems. But like, I wish. This sounds really sad. I wished on my birthday cake that he would say words, and I blew the candle. And like, it's hard to explain. Sorry. Um,
No worries.
Basically, you're much more in tune with this thing anyway. But I just feel like pregnancy it does bring people closer together, but can't separate them as well.
So why would you recommend The Exorcist under, because obviously I know
Well,
there's some parental aspects there.
yeah. Well, the whole movie. Well, I've always seen it. I haven't seen it in a while, like, but from what I remember, it's always it's not about well, it is about her. She only has the one child, and she wants to have the best life ever. But as you know, that doesn't end up that way. But that one I saw the other day, that the mummy, that kind of like tied in with it. That was really good because they thought they had two kids, but they felt like that wasn't it was their kids obviously, but they felt like their child was still out there, even though they were, and the message of it is pretty much sacrifice at the end. Like the husband wanted to sacrifice for his kids, no matter what. Which I would do the same. I would do in
Yeah.
the same situation.
Pregnancy horror hits differently. Every one of the films we're discussing carries the same underlying fear. What happens when your body stops belonging to you? They're not really about supernatural babies as much as they're about being dismissed when you know something's wrong, being controlled under the guise of care, being expected to endure pain quietly, being reduced to function instead of a person. And for some people, it isn't fiction, it's lived experience, which is, why these films don't just scare me in that sense, but they stay with me because underneath the horror, there's truth. So, moving on to cover more of pregnancy horror related movies, there's Grace. Grace is quieter, but still deeply unsettling. A baby's born, not quite alive, and yet the mother still loves the child. She feeds it, she protects it, even when it becomes clear that something's wrong. So this one's a lot more ominous and sinister, and
Yeah.
it's an uncomfortable exploration of attachment. Um, the expectation that a mother's love is unconditional no matter what, even if it harms her, drains her, even if it's unhealthy, she continues because that's what a mother is
Mhm.
supposed to do. That's what society tells her love looks like. And that's where the horror sits, not in the baby, but in the expectation that she must sacrifice herself completely. As well as Grace, I would recommend The Brood. Take something internal and makes it physical. A woman's rage, her trauma literally manifests into children. Violent, uncontrolled, dangerous. But they don't come from nowhere, they come from her pain. There's something really uncomfortable about how this film presents motherhood because it acknowledges something society doesn't like to admit. Women can feel anger, deep, consuming anger. And when that anger is suppressed, invalidated, punished, it doesn't disappear. That pain has to go somewhere, it transforms. And in this case, into something monstrous. So, what people see as horror here is actually unprocessed trauma finally being expressed, just in the only way it's allowed to exist.
Well, another one I haven't seen in a long time, but it always I always remember it was Mother. Have you ever seen that? No.
Say that again?
That Mother. Have you ever seen that movie? That
No, I mistook that for Mama, didn't I, last time? No.
yeah,
So you
I know
tell
it.
me
They are.
about Mother and I'll put it on my list to
Well,
watch.
Mother is basically about this well-off family that moved to a new city, and she finds out she becomes pregnant, and after she, it's the most disturbing thing I've ever seen in my life, and it takes a lot to do that. Um, the bit I don't want to give too much away about it if you haven't seen it before, but basically she wants to save the child as much as possible, and the father is in part of is part of a cult, pretty much, and the only way you can like level up, if you get me, is
Yeah.
to sacrifice your first child, which
Wow,
I think
okay.
is, I know
That's
that
the
got
theme
me
in a
right.
lot of movies, though, as well, isn't it? The cult angle and the sacrifice of children. I mean, that's an occurring theme. So maybe in another podcast we could cover some of the best cult movies we've come across.
Yeah.
So tell me more about the parental aspect of this
Well,
one.
I've only seen it once or twice because I even traumatized me, and that's, as I said, a lot to say. But the thing I noticed about it most, like at the start, she didn't feel like the parental figure, but you felt like I could never be a mother.
Mm,
But then, like when it did happen, obviously it became real to her, and the child became more a number one priority than the actual husband because I can talk about it. Like pretty much ends his life before before he takes the life of the child. So I think it's quite and not a nice thing to do, obviously, but you would do anything for your child. Real life experiences do mix with this, I think.
So do you think this shows an element of jealousy from, male partners when it comes to childbirth? Because when we look into criminology and documentaries, that again is an occurring theme where the man feels pushed to the side. So instead of working with the wife in being the father, they feel rejected from affection because that's now been, reserved for the child.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think in a lot of cases, in God life experience myself, I think my own father, I think he like, 'cause I'm in my mid-30s now, and I think he still treats me like I'm a little child. I went, no, I'm nearly 40 now, and he went, but you're still be my baby. I went, it never does change. But my cousin, well, she had a couple of kids there recently, and he seems more connected with them than he ever was with me. But I never really saw him. Sorry, I'm talking about too much personal things. So,
No, it's fine. That's what the podcast's for. If you can relate to a horror movie, in that sense, then I think that's a good thing, because there is obviously an issue in regards to attention, probably because society doesn't, prepare men enough for the changes that, will happen when they become a father. And it can be very alien to them. And, some people struggle with it, other people are more natural. But I
I don't
think,
think men understand what women physically or emotionally go through. They can't. You can't just
well, our body
show it.
changes. It's hard. They're not easy, especially if you have underlying conditions, I mean, there's a lot of horror in that in itself. I mean, we touched on the orphan last time, and
Yeah.
obviously that starts off with the woman's miscarriage and the trauma,
Oh,
that was affiliated to that, which led to them, fostering this child that turned out to become, an escaped psychiatric patient that has
yeah.
daddy issues, and wanted the father to herself, which was a big twist.
Yeah.
I'll put a trigger warning on and a spoiler alert on the
That was
video
one of my
so
favorite
people don't
films
have
growing
to
up.
worry. But again, that's about attachment, it's about love language, it's about trauma, and it's about how experiences shape people. People need to be held to account more. They need to, analyze themselves more, think what aspects, can I change? Am I being harmful here? Or, is there a way I can be helpful instead? And a lot of these horror movies teach you little things in regards to that. I think a lot of people that have psychotic breaks during pregnancy, postnatal depression, that sort of thing could relate to revenge, because she literally believes that unborn child is telling her to kill, and that's again a narrative that's been in a lot of other horror series and movies and things as well. This evil child that manipulates the parents or the adults into murder, that sort of thing. And it's the removal of autonomy, the removal of choice. It's coercion. It comes all the way back to trauma and abuse, which is what makes these so scary, because they do relate to modern day life experiences, and people have experienced things that are relatable to these horror movies.
Well, the one I was thinking about this earlier. The one that comes about, it's not so much about pregnant, but more about Shayla's Carrie. That scared me when I first saw it. I was told not to watch it. I was told not to watch it, but I went against it, and I went, I shouldn't have turned this on. Because the opening scene, I went, because I didn't know what periods were that day, obviously. And as I say, I don't want to ask my mother because, well, she'll know, but I think her mother was very manipulative. Mothers can be manipulative, but some mothers can be overbearing. Don't get me wrong, but don't get me.
Everybody has a different experience and a different idea of what being a parent means, and then obviously it depends on cultural aspects, religious aspects, what sort of environment that they've grown up in themselves. I still think that pregnancy education and parental education should be mandatory. I still think that it would help people grow into better adults if school tackled some of the literal things we have to do as adults. The academic side
they teach you about
is
pregnancy,
amazing.
but they don't teach you the afterwards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The academic side's amazing. That can set you up for educational purposes and get you a career. But what about life? We should start having more life classes, or even for people to opt into those would still educate a lot more than what are educated today.
Yeah. Well, what my mummy always said to me, like everybody says, it says, you're not having a baby, you're having a person. There's a difference to that.
And they will have a whole life and mind of their own, and their whole different personality, and nothing can prepare you for it. Like literally nothing. You can do all the courses in the world, and your child will still surprise you.
Yeah. Have you heard this? You probably heard this. Well, to your parents or whatever, like said, I don't want you to end up like me, but you kind of like do.
A lot of people talk about changing things because they went through something when they were a child that their parents did to them and they don't want to continue that trauma. I think it's important that we do analyze how we bring up our children and to how, our child's welfare is. I appreciate everybody watching the show today, and I'm going over to Peter to sign off. Thank you from me.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast. We'll be doing the next one in the next couple of months or so, next month or so, and hopefully Vanessa can join us. Thank you very much for your time for watching, and take care.
Thank you for watching Creepy Cafè podcast. Bye.